Hi folks, welcome to this video on commercialisation, media and sponsorship. Basically what I'm going to do here is look at the varying impacts of these things on different people, the sport, coaches, performers, people like that. One thing that I would say is don't forget commercialisation, media and sponsorship are kind of the same thing. You don't have one without the other, hence why I've got this little diagram here, sometimes called the golden triangle. You've got sport, you've got sponsorship, you've got media coverage. And what we're just going to do is show you how these things interact and relate with each other. So what you've got, if you've got a sport that is high standard and it's entertaining, people, companies are going to want to put it on TV. They want to give it a high level of media coverage, TV, social media, press, things like that. They're going to want to show games. As a result, that is going to attract sponsorship. If something is on TV, if something is in the public viewing arena on a regular basis, it's going to attract high levels of sponsorship. As a result of this increased sponsorship, that's going to mean more money going back into the sport. Now the thing is, more money goes into the sport, that means you can buy better players, you can increase the quality of your training facilities, of your stadia. That in turn makes the sport more entertaining and raises the standard even more, which makes it on TV even more, which attracts great levels of sponsorship, which puts more money into the sport, which raises the standard of the sport and makes it more entertaining, which puts it on TV more, which puts more sponsors in, and so on and so forth. So it's one of those things where, why is it called the golden triangle? Because they fuel each other. They one feeds into the other. But equally, having said that, that's all well and good if you're a big sport or you're a big performer and things are going well. What happens if your things aren't going so well? What happens if you're a performer who's just been, found guilty of taking drugs? What if you're a sport that his name has been dragged through the mud, such as cycling, athletics, with drug scandals and things like that? Well, the opposite is going to have an effect. That sport loses its credibility. It's not going to be on TV as much, or that performer loses their credibility and they're not on TV as much. That means sponsors are likely to drop them, as they have with FIFA, as they have with the IAAF, as they have with Maria Sharapova, as they did with Tiger Woods and Lance Armstrong and Manny Pacquiao and things like that. So less money goes to these players, goes to their sports, which potentially lowers their standard of performance, which means they're not on TV as much, which then attracts even lower levels of sponsorship, which means less money, which lowers their performance even more, etc., etc. So this golden triangle is absolutely crucial to modern day sport. I think, if you're a football fan, it's rumoured that Manchester United not qualifying for the Champions League in the first season that they didn't cost them £53 million. Now that's in lost revenue due to sponsorship, which means you can't buy as many good players anymore, which lowers your chance of getting to the Champions League the following season. So, sport is a business now. There's no avoiding it. So what we're just going to quickly look at now are the pros and cons to this commercialisation, this media, this sponsorship on various people associated with sport. So someone who's currently doing very, very well off the back of, their sporting success, Mo Farah is an example of that. So let's see what increased commercialisation and sponsorship and media coverage, what are the benefits of that on a performer such as Mo Farah. So here are a few. He's obviously going to get more wages, he's going to get more sponsorship money, more endorsements, more funding because he's highly successful and he's on TV a lot. He's going to become a role model off the back of his sporting success to millions of people worldwide. Now, some people might argue that it's a disadvantage, the demand to compete at more events. He's going to increase his risk of injury and illness. Yeah, but he's getting paid to attend these events, so the opportunity to earn more money. Everyone wants to have the Olympic champions or world champions compete at their events in their countries, and they'll pay for those people to attend. As an athlete in this country, as a British athlete, he technically still has amateur status. He does not get paid a contract, a salary, things like that. But with all this extra money coming in through his success and through media coverage, he can now train full-time. He doesn't have to work part-time. He can train full-time. And equally, that money that he earns will allow him to increase the quality of his training, better training facilities, better equipment, better support, research and development, things like that. So all of these are benefits of increased media coverage for a performer. So what are the downsides to increased media coverage, increased sponsorship and commercialisation? Well, I'm going to use it, not all points are relevant to Lance Armstrong, but he's an example. So we're just going to draw a few things off him. Well, two that are definitely related to Lance are the, increased deviancy and the greater pressure to win. If you're on TV a lot, the pressure to be successful, the pressure to retain those sponsorship deals and that media coverage is very, very high, and it's going to increase the risk of you drug taking or doing something illegal because of the pressure that is now on you to win. But some that are not related to Lance but are still negatives. So not all sports benefit. What if you're a performer in a sport that isn't on TV a lot? You're not attracting the sponsorship deals because you've not got the TV coverage. Therefore, you can't afford to train full time. So, there are lots of sports that are big in some countries and not in others. As a result of increased media coverage, some rules of sports are changed and formats are changed. And that can be detrimental to some players. They have their ways of playing. They've always played this way. And suddenly a rule change comes in or a format change comes in and it ruins their game. And equally, there can be an over-reliance of some sports and some performers on the sponsorship front. So as soon as those sponsors drop them, they've got no way of supporting themselves through their professional sporting career. So, there are lots of downsides as well as the positives. So there's a balance point in terms of the impact of commercialisation, sponsorship and media on the performer. So what about the spectators then? What about us who watch sport? How does commercialisation, sponsorship, media benefit us, but how does it take away from the sporting experience from us? So again, I'm going to write the positives in green, I'm going to write the negatives in red. So we'll start with the positives first. So what are the benefits then? Well, the more money that comes into a sport, the better the standard of performance. You can buy better players, you can increase the quality of their training facilities, as we've said before, so that means more entertainment for these people watching. You also get better stadia. So all-seater stadia, nice comfy chairs, retractable roofs so you can keep the rain off. Fantastic news for us spectators. We also get, before the competition, halfway through it, during, at the end, expert analysis. So we get education. We get things pointing out to us that we didn't know. So there's an educational element to sports being on TV a lot. We also get exciting new formats. So things like 2020 cricket. You might not be cricket fans. 2020 cricket has definitely brought people to cricket. It's a hell of a lot more entertaining for a lot more people than it used to be when it was just the test match format. Rules change. Things like playoffs introduced into many sports, such as in rugby league. So you don't just have a league winner with 5 games to go at the end of the season, so no one's watching it anymore. Someone might have won the league with 5 games to go, but you've still got the playoffs where teams are going to get dumped out each round. So that can keep it exciting for us, the spectator. And we also have improved technology at the ground, such as HD screens. We get 3D, don't we, these days? With all the different camera positions and things like that. So there's multiple benefits to more money, more TV, more commercialisation, more sponsorship to us, the spectators. So what about the disadvantages then? So the disadvantages then, look at some of the advantages and just turn them on the heads. We've got exciting new formats and rule changes, but the traditional nature of the sport has been lost. For every person who likes the introduction of 2020 cricket, we've got those who are disgusted by it and who would prefer it to have stayed as test match cricket. If you are the fan of a minority sport, you're not going to see it on TV as much. So you're not going to, that sport is not going to see much media coverage, therefore very little sponsorship, and the standard is not going to be raised. Even if your sport is on TV, loads of advert breaks. Sponsors trying to push their products onto you, and when someone sponsors an event, they get lots of tickets in terms of hospitality and things like that. So the tickets available to you, the loyal fan, and you, the spectator, there aren't as many, or you've got to pay higher prices. Because there's so much pressure on winning as well, the increased risk of match fixing. So you're not seeing a truly competitive experience, sadly. And a lot of sports, due to sponsors having to have their start times changed. If you look at this country, the UK, go back 20, 30 years, every single football match kicked off at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. Now that it's on TV and we want to show more games, it's on Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night, Wednesday afternoon, Saturday, 3 games on a Saturday, 3 games on a Sunday. Yeah, that's great if you like football, but it can also be saturation of the market. Your team might have to play at different times based on a TV schedule, not on, when you can get there. And also, you have a merchandise monopoly. If Nike or Adidas or Reebok or anyone else sponsor your team, you have to buy their products and they can charge what they like. You have very little choice in the matter. You either pay the prices or you don't. So what are the benefits of increased media commercialisation and sponsorship on the sport itself? Well, let's take cricket as an example of that. I've mentioned 2020 cricket a few times. So, things like the IPL, the Aussie Big Bash, has really come in and revolutionised cricket and the way it should be and the way it's played and the money that gets invested in it. That's crucially the thing. So what are the advantages of all of this, what are the advantages to the sport of all this increased commercialisation, media sponsorship? As you'd expect, when a sport really attracts new investment and really gets on TV a lot more, you're going to generate more role models, more kids going out on a weekend trying to be like the people that they've seen play at the weekend or in an evening, which, you've advertised your sport to a new audience with that respect, which is then going to increase your participation rates and increase your grassroots participation levels and things like that. That, as a result, is going to bring in new sponsors. People who want to be sponsoring a sport that people are talking about, that people are playing, that people are getting involved with. So, it's that self-fulfilling prophecy. You're going to get the next generation of talent coming through, which is going to be your next superstars and heroes, which is going to attract your next generation of sponsors and the next amount of money that's going to come in. So it's really, really important to get these sports global. But like we've said, for all the positives, there are definite negatives. So what are the negatives to the sport of increased media sponsorship and commercialisation? Well, as we've mentioned, and this is what I don't need to be afraid of, we've mentioned some of these in terms of the spectators and some of these in terms of the performers, and there is a great deal of overlap. Just as the performers and spectators get disadvantaged or advantaged due to rule formats and change, so does the sport itself. Some of those in the sport would not have liked the introduction of 2020 cricket. I dare say some people may have even resigned over the fact that it was brought in. Again, the sport loses the control of the playing times. You've got to put events on based on when peak viewing figures are, not when you want to play the event as the governing body of the sport. Look what's happened in terms of football and athletics and cycling in recent years. They over-sensationalise negative events. You mentioned cycling, athletics, and the first thing that most people think is drugs, because it's on the media all the time. You mentioned football and FIFA, you think corruption. You don't think of the World Cup. So the media can over-sensationalise negative events and ruin the image of your sport. What else happens on TV? You pay your monthly subscriptions and you pay everything like that, and then suddenly pay-per-view comes on as well, so you can start to get charged more for watching events. So you've got no real regulation over the prices that you pay. When a sport is on TV, you might get lower attendance at the televised event, because what's the point in buying a ticket when I can watch it at home? And you often get oversaturation. Too much football, too much rugby, too much hockey. It's just getting boring and bland now. I know some of you out there going, you can never have too much sport on TV, but for every one of you, there's one that thinks the opposite. So, the sport can benefit, but it can suffer under increased media sponsorship and commercialisation. Right, so there's only one more section to look at, and that is the impact of the media on the coach. So here's a couple of coaches who've worked in the English Premier League in terms of football. So let's, relate some of the topics. I'm not going to relate all of these to each of them, but let's, think about the pros and the cons. And again, we're going to go pros of increased media sponsorship, commercialisation in green, and the negatives in red. So, Eddie Howe took Bournemouth from, was it League Two into the Premiership, So what has it done for him, increased media coverage? It's raised his profile. He's now, from someone who the majority of people have not heard of, he's, a future England manager off the back of the successes he's had in charge of Bournemouth. He's going to get an increased salary, so it's good for him. Due to the increased media coverage that Bournemouth have in the Premier League, he gets more money to develop his squad. And that hopefully leads his team on to greater success. But also because his opponents are on TV a lot, it's easier to analyse his opponents. How are they playing? How are they lining up today? And how can we best break them down based on how they've played in previous games? So there's lots of benefits to the coach of increased media coverage of their sport. Now, I know Mourinho's an unbelievably successful football coach, but, I'm doing this at a time in the season where he lost his job at Chelsea. Chelsea really underperformed. Now, you know, what are the downsides to increase commercialisation, media, sponsorship? There is much greater pressure to be successful, okay? You're one of the top four, so you've got to stay in that top four. You have to deal with the media constantly. You've got to do press conferences, and you can feel like you get asked stupid questions all the time. You know, how many times did he, you know, walk out of press conferences and not answer questions and act flippant and things like that? Ultimately, he lost his job. So when the results don't come in, there's a hire and fire culture in certain sports based on based on the media coverage on the commercial deals. As we've mentioned here, what's a big advantage is it's easier for you to analyse your opponent's tactics, but then the obvious downside is your own tactics are being analysed, your own formats, formations, things like that are being broken down by your opponents week in, week out. And ultimately, this ties in with Chelsea. It's unlikely that Chelsea are going to qualify, as I'm doing this video, for the Champions League off the back of their poor start, which means less coverage on TV next season, which means lower levels of funding, and which means less attractive to big players. Clubs are going to go to clubs that are playing in the Premier League, the Champions League. And if they're not, I might go to a club that is. So they might end up losing a lot of their players as a result of this. So, there's big pros and cons. What you've got to do is you've got to analyse the question carefully. It's often going to be discuss the impact of commercialisation, media sponsorship. Remember, they're all the same thing. Money is money, from sponsors, from the commercialisation of sport, from the media coverage. And then look at who is it asking you about. Is it asking about the coach, the performer, the sport, or the spectator? And just tailor your answers to that need. And don't forget, some of the advantages automatically make disadvantages as well. Hopefully you found this video useful, folks.